Picture the moment when daylight surrenders to the Pacific. The sky above Easter Island bleeds from amber to violet, and the first stars pierce through the gathering darkness. Along the southern coast, where volcanic cliffs meet the endless ocean, the Moai stand in silent assembly. They are not merely stone. They are presences. As twilight deepens, their silhouettes sharpen against the horizon broad shoulders. Elongated faces, eye sockets that seem to hold shadows within shadows. The wind carries salt and whispers across the grass. Waves strike the rocks below with rhythmic percussion, a heartbeat older than memory. And in this liminal hour, something shifts. The statues cease to be relics. They become watchers. Photographers who linger past sunset speak of an unsettling sensation, the feeling of being observed. Scientists dismiss it as psychology, the human mind projecting consciousness onto lifeless forms. Yet the sensation persists. At night, the Moai seem different. The angles of their faces catch moonlight in unexpected ways. Their weight seems to press not just into the earth, but into time itself. This is Easter Island after dark Rapa Nui in its most mysterious hour. By day, the statues are explained, categorized, understood within frameworks of archaeology and history. But when night falls, they slip free from these neat boxes. They become something older, something that resists explanation. They become questions carved in stone. What stories do these giants hold? What memories lie buried beneath centuries of soil and silence? And why, in the deep hours of the night, do they feel less like monuments and more like guardians standing watch over secrets the world has forgotten? The mystery begins here, in the gathering dark, where science ends and wonder begins. Long before the statues rose, there was only ocean. The Pacific stretches across nearly half the Earth's surface, a vast blue wilderness broken only by scattered islands like stars in a liquid sky. And among these islands, one stands truly alone, Easter Island. Rapa Nui, the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. Mainstream archaeology tells us the story began around 1200 CE, when Polynesian voyagers made landfall after journeys that defied the imagination. These were not accidental castaways. They were master navigators who read stars, waves, and bird migrations with the precision of modern instruments. They carried with them chickens, rats, sweet potatoes, and taro, a complete ecosystem for survival. They brought language, cosmology, and a tradition of monumental stone carving that would reach its zenith on this lonely speck of land. The island they found was subtropical paradise. Massive palm forests covered the slopes. Seabirds nested in uncountable millions. Freshwater crater lakes reflected the Southern Cross. For centuries, the Rapa Nui people thrived, their population growing, their culture complexifying. They developed a unique script rungo and built ceremonial platforms called ahu along the coastline. And they carved the Moai. This is the accepted narrative. Settlement by skilled seafarers. Cultural evolution in isolation. Environmental transformation through human activity. It is a story supported by carbon dating, pollen analysis, and archaeological excavation. It fits within established frameworks of Polynesian expansion across the Pacific. Yet even this mainstream account contains elements of wonder. How did people sailing in wooden canoes navigate 2,000 miles of open ocean to find this island? What drove them to invest such staggering effort in carving and transporting nearly 900 stone giants? And why, when resources became scarce, did they continue building ever larger statues, as if compelled by forces beyond practical necessity? The orthodox explanation provides answers. But as darkness settles over Rapa Nui and the Moai stand against the star-filled sky, one senses that the story is incomplete, that beneath the layer of known history lies something deeper, waiting to be uncovered. The quarry at Rano Raraku is where the Moai were born. This extinct volcano on the island's eastern edge holds the birthplace of giants. Within its slopes, nearly 400 statues remain in various stages of completion, some barely roughed out from the living rock, others fully carved but never detached, still others abandoned mid-transport as if the workers simply stopped and walked away. Archaeologists have mapped the process with scientific precision. The raw material is volcanic tuff, a compressed ash that is both workable and durable. Carvers used basalt hand axes called toki, slowly pecking away at the stone in a technique requiring patience and collective effort. A single Noi might demand a year of labor from a team of 15 specialists. The statue was carved face up, still attached to the bedrock at its spine. Only when the front and sides were complete would workers tunnel beneath, severing the figure from the mountain that gave it birth. The engineering is impressive, yet comprehensible. No lost technology required. No mystical explanations necessary. Just human ingenuity, social organization, and relentless dedication. By day, this makes perfect sense. Researchers have even replicated the process, demonstrating that Polynesian tools and methods were entirely sufficient. But visit Rano Raraku at night, and the atmosphere transforms. Moonlight pools in the eye sockets of half-finished faces emerging from rock. Shadows gather in the crater, where statues stand like a petrified army awaiting orders that never came. The silence is profound, broken only by wind through grass and the occasional call of seabirds. Here, in the darkness, the Moai seem less like human creations and more like beings summoned from stone. Their expressions stoic, inscrutable appear to shift in the moving shadows. One begins to understand why islanders spoke of the statues possessing mana, a spiritual power that animated them. Science explains the how, but it struggles with the why of such obsessive creation, and it cannot touch the feeling that these stones somehow remember the hands that shaped them. The quarry holds answers, but under the stars, it holds questions too. The Rapa Nui people never saw their ancestors as truly gone. Death was not an ending, but a transformation. The spirits of the dead the Akwaku remained present, walking the island after dark, dwelling within sacred places, inhabiting the very stones that bore their stylized likenesses. The Moai were not mere memorials, they were vessels, conduits between the living world and the realm beyond. Traditional accounts speak of rituals conducted in darkness, when the boundary between realms grew thin. Certain nights determined by lunar cycles and seasonal markers were reserved for communion with ancestors. Priests would approach the Ahu platforms, where Moai stood facing inland, watching over the villages. Offerings would be made. Chants would rise into the night. And in the stillness that followed, the islanders believed their ancestors listened. This spiritual relationship with the statues shaped every aspect of Rapa Nui culture. The Moai were oriented to protect the living, their backs to the ocean, their gaze toward the communities they once led. When a statue was raised, an event requiring the coordination of hundreds of people and immense wooden scaffolding. It was not merely engineering, but sacred theater. The moment the Moai stood upright was the moment it received its mana, the moment it awakened. Anthropologists view these beliefs as cultural expressions of social hierarchy and kinship systems. The Moai represented chiefly lineages, their construction a form of competitive display among rival clans. This interpretation is valid and supported by evidence. Yet it doesn't fully capture the experiential reality, what it felt like to live in a world where your ancestors stood 15 feet tall in stone, staring at you across firelight and shadow. Modern Rapa Nui descendants still speak of the Akwaku, not as metaphor, but as presence. There are places on the island where they will not go after dark. Certain statues that carry particular weight of memory and warning. The scientific worldview dismisses such things as superstition, psychological projection onto inanimate objects. But in the deep of night, when wind stirs the grass around the Ahu and moonlight gleams on weathered stone faces, the distinction between belief and reality becomes less certain. The Moai watch, and perhaps, in ways beyond measurement, they remember. The central engineering puzzle of Easter Island has always been transport. How did the Rapa Nui people move multi-ton statues across miles of uneven terrain, without wheeled vehicles, without draft animals, with only human muscle and ingenuity? For decades, theories multiplied sleds, rollers, ramps, elaborate pulley systems. Each had merits, each had problems. Then came the walking hypothesis. Archaeologists noticed something peculiar about Moai design. Their center of gravity creates instability when upright, making them rock side to side with minimal force. Computer models suggested a method teams positioned around the statue, pulling ropes in alternating rhythm, literally walking the giant forward in a controlled waddle. In 2012, researchers actually did it, moving a 10-ton replica across a field using precisely this technique. The mainstream explanation crystallized. The Moai walked. Not through magic or lost technology, but through brilliant understanding of physics and coordinated human effort. Mystery solved. Question answered. Another ancient enigma yielding to rigorous scientific inquiry. Yet the walking explanation, compelling as it is, opens other questions. Why design statues specifically for this transport method? Why not simply carve them lighter or smaller? The effort invested seems disproportionate to practical needs. And there remains the matter of how many statues show no damage from transport. No chips, scrapes, or stress fractures that should result from being rocked upright across miles of rough ground. At night, when reenactments are filmed for documentaries, something uncanny happens. The play of shadows and torchlight makes the moving statue seem almost alive, turning its head slightly, shifting its weight with deliberate purpose. Camera operators report discomfort, a primal unease at seeing stone lurch forward in the darkness. The rational mind knows it's just rope and leverage. But deeper instincts react as if witnessing something that shouldn't move moving. The Rapa Nui oral traditions preserve stories of the Moai walking on their own, animated by mana, obeying the commands of priests who possessed the sacred knowledge. Archaeologists hear these accounts as metaphorical descriptions of the physical transport process. But what if the metaphor worked both ways? What if the engineering method was chosen precisely because it mimicked the spiritual ideal statues that walked? Like living ancestors returning home? The statues did walk. On this, ancient memory and modern science agree. But whether they walked as objects moved by human hands or as something more remains a question the night leaves unanswered. For most of the modern era, visitors to Easter Island saw only Moai heads. The iconic photographs show enormous stone faces emerging from grassland, as if giants had been buried neck-deep by some cataclysm. This image became synonymous with the island mysterious heads dotting the landscape, their bodies apparently absent or lost. Then excavation revealed the truth. The statues have bodies, full torsos, extending 10 or 15 feet beneath the soil. Centuries of erosion had buried them, layer by layer, until only their faces remained visible. What appeared to be heads were actually complete figures, gradually consumed by the earth itself. The revelation transforms our understanding of the Moai. Instead of 3-meter sculptures, they are 6-meter monoliths. Their proportions shift from squat to imposing. Their presence magnifies. And the question arises, what else lies buried that we haven't yet uncovered? At night, partially excavated Moai create a surreal tableau. The exposed upper body stands in moonlight, while the unexcavated base remains swallowed by shadow and soil. They appear to be emerging or perhaps sinking, caught between visibility and oblivion. Archaeologists work carefully, documenting every layer of sediment, reading geological history in the strata that entombed these giants. But the burial adds another dimension to the mystery. If these statues stood for centuries, watching over villages, how much soil accumulated during that time? And what happened in the intervening years, the collapse of the statue-building culture, the shift to the Birdman cult, the devastations of European contact, all while the Moai slowly disappeared into the earth, becoming heads, becoming fragments, becoming memory. The buried bodies remind us that revelation is always incomplete. What we see is surface. Beneath every answer lies another question, waiting in the dark. The traditional narrative of Easter Island has long served as cautionary tale, a civilization that consumed its environment until collapse became inevitable. The story goes, unchecked population growth, deforestation for agriculture and statue transport, soil erosion, extinction of land birds, depletion of marine resources. By the time Europeans arrived in 1722, the island population had crashed from a peak of perhaps 15,000 to fewer than 3,000. The Moai lay toppled. The culture had imploded. Jared Diamond famously called it ecocide, a self-inflicted catastrophe with global lessons about sustainability and hubris. The narrative has power. A small society, isolated from outside rescue, pushing past ecological limits until the system breaks. It resonates with contemporary anxieties about climate change and resource depletion. But recent research complicates this story. Pollen analysis shows deforestation occurred more gradually than believed, possibly driven by drought and rat predation on palm seeds rather than human clearing alone. Population estimates have been revised downward. Perhaps the island never held 15,000 people. Agricultural practices show sophistication, with rock gardens and mulching techniques designed to preserve soil fertility. And the collapse was not total. Rapa Nui culture persisted, adapted, transformed. Some archaeologists now argue for resilience rather than ruin. Yes, resources diminished. Yes, the statue-building era ended. But these were adaptations to changing circumstances, not failures of wisdom. The shift from Moai worship to the Bergman competition reflected pragmatic adjustment ritual and status-seeking channeled into practices requiring fewer resources. Survival, not collapse. Under the night sky, as stars wheel overhead the same way they did centuries ago, the debate feels somewhat beside the point. The Moai still stand, or lie where they were toppled during the clan wars and Christian conversion campaigns. They speak to something beyond resource management, a human impulse to create meaning, to build monuments that outlast their builders, to reach toward permanence in a world defined by change. The pressure was real, ecological, social, spiritual. But what the Rapa Nui people chose to do under that pressure, to carve beauty and power from stone, to construct a cosmology that made ancestors into mountains, speaks to resilience of a different kind, the kind that persists in stone and story, long after the society they created has transformed beyond recognition. The night holds both narratives, collapse and continuity, failure and endurance. Perhaps, as with most human stories, the truth encompasses both. There came a time when the statues stopped rising. The quarries fell silent. The last Moai, larger than any before, stretching 21 meters if completed, remains forever unfinished, half-born from the volcano's flank. Something fundamental shifted in Rapa Nui culture, a transformation so profound that the central organizing practice of centuries simply ceased. Archaeological evidence points to intensifying competition among the island's clans. Each tribe, there were roughly 10 major groups, had its own ahu platforms and moai, symbols of prestige and ancestral power. As resources tightened, the competition escalated. Bigger statues, more elaborate platforms, a cultural arms race in stone. But such races always end, either in resolution or exhaustion. The oral traditions speak of the Huri Moai, the statue-toppling wars. Rival clans deliberately destroyed each other's moai, pushing them face down from their platforms in acts of spiritual warfare. If the statues embodied ancestral mana, their destruction was a form of killing, silencing the enemy's protective spirits, severing their connection to the sacred past. Meanwhile, a new cult emerged at Orongo, a village perched on the crater rim at the island's southwestern edge. Here, The Birdman competition replaced Moai construction as the primary avenue for status and leadership. Each year, representatives from different clans would race down the vertical cliff face, swim through shark-infested waters to a small offshore islet, and return with the first egg of the sooty turn. The winner's clan leader became the Tangata Manu, the Birdman, and held supreme power for a year. This ritual could not be more different from Moai construction, where statue building required coordinated effort, vast resources, and generations of sustained commitment. The Birdman cult emphasized individual prowess, annual renewal, and adaptation to scarcity. It was a cultural pivot, a reinvention of how power and prestige were constituted. At night, Orongo is haunting. Stone houses crouch against the rim of the crater, which drops away into darkness on one side, while the ocean surges black and silver far below on the other. Petroglyphs of birdmen, half-human, half-seabird figures are carved into the rocks, barely visible in moonlight. The wind here is fierce, unceasing, carrying the sound of waves and the cries of night-hunting seabirds. Standing at Orongo after dark, one senses the desperation and brilliance of the pivot the Rapa Nui people made. When the old ways could no longer sustain meaning or order, they created new ones. The Moai became the past. The Birdman became the future. And in that transition, an entire cosmology transformed, leaving the stone ancestors to stand in silent witness to the civilization that once raised them and then moved beyond them. In 1868, a British sailor named William Thomson, not yet the archaeologist he would become, spent several weeks on Easter Island aboard HMS Topaz. His journals contain conventional observations, measurements of Ahu platforms, sketches of Moai, notes on the few hundred islanders who had survived the Peruvian slave raids and smallpox epidemics. But there is one entry that doesn't fit the pattern. Written late at night, possibly influenced by rum, possibly by something else, Thomson describes walking back to the ship's landing party after investigating inland sights. A fog had rolled in from the ocean, dense and luminous under a three-quarter moon. Visibility dropped to meters. And in that fog, Thomson claimed he saw a Moai move. Not sway in the wind, not appear to move through tricks of light, but actually glide his word across a field, turning slightly as if tracking his path. He ran. Later, when he mentioned the incident to local guides, they exchanged looks but offered no explanation. Historians who later reviewed Thomson's journals noted this passage but dismissed it as fatigue, alcohol, or atmospheric distortion, creating optical illusions. Pacific Islands are known for strange fogs that refract light in unexpected ways, creating mirages and false perceptions of movement. Yet the story has persisted in the margins of Easter Island literature. Some researchers point to it as evidence of forgotten transport methods that could move statues more fluidly than the walking. Technique suggests perhaps rollers combined with ice-lubricated paths, or techniques lost when the last knowledgeable elders died. Others see it as proof that Moai transport occurred at night under ritual conditions, which might explain why so few accounts survived in the oral tradition. And then there are those who take Thomson's account at face value, who suggest that in the liminal space of fog and moonlight, in a place where ancestors were believed to walk, something genuinely anomalous occurred. Not supernatural, perhaps, but arising from perceptual and psychological dimensions that Western science struggles to categorize. No one will ever know what Thomson truly saw. The moment is lost to history, preserved only in a water-stained journal page written by candlelight aboard a ship long since scrapped. But the story lingers, adding one more layer to the island's mythology, a reminder that eyewitness testimony, especially in extreme environments under extraordinary circumstances, can reveal truths that resist comfortable explanation. On foggy nights, even now, locals speak of the Moai differently. Less like stone, more like watchers who remember how to move. What if the mainstream explanation, comprehensive as it seems, is incomplete? What if techniques existed that have left no archaeological trace because they were material light, knowledge-heavy methods that depended on understanding rather than artifacts? This is where speculation enters. Not baseless fantasy, but informed inquiry into what might have been possible with knowledge systems different from our own. Consider rope technology. Polynesians were master rope makers, creating cordage from fibrous plants that could bear enormous weight. But rope decays. Few samples survive centuries in tropical climates. Could there have been rope configurations weaving patterns, knotting systems, tension distribution techniques that multiplied effective force beyond what modern experiments have tested? Or consider acoustic principles. Some researchers have noted that certain Moai locations exhibit unusual sound properties, echoes that shouldn't exist, resonances that amplify specific frequencies. In cultures worldwide, sound has been used in ritual contexts to alter consciousness. Synchronized group effort even reportedly affect physical objects through sustained harmonic vibration. Could coordinated chanting have played a role not captured in archaeological evidence? Then there's the matter of magnetism. Easter Island's volcanic rock contains iron-rich minerals. The statues themselves, carved from tuff, show varying magnetic properties depending on the specific stone. Could ancient workers have developed empirical understanding of magnetic repulsion or attraction, using it in subtle ways to ease transport? No evidence proves this, but absence of evidence, especially for knowledge-based techniques, is not evidence of absence. At night, when researchers conduct acoustic tests around the Moai, strange things happen. Frequencies that should dissipate seem to linger. Sounds echo from unexpected directions. Instruments pick up low-frequency vibrations below human hearing range that pulse from the stones themselves. Possibly just thermal contraction as the rock cools, possibly something more complex. The lost knowledge hypothesis doesn't require alien intervention or mystical powers. It simply proposes that a culture which spent centuries perfecting one specific task, moving massive stones, might have developed sophisticated empirical techniques that left minimal physical trace. Methods transmitted orally from master to apprentice, refined through generations, lost when the culture fragmented and the last knowledgeable practitioners died. We will likely never know the full extent of Rapa Nui engineering. What we can say is this: the people who walked statues across miles of terrain were not primitive. They were brilliant pragmatists who understood physics at an intuitive, experiential level that modern science is still working to fully reconstruct. And in the darkness, when the Moai stand silent and imposing, one can almost sense the presence of that lost knowledge hovering just beyond reach, encrypted in stone, waiting for questions we haven't yet learned to ask. Remove light pollution from the human world, and the universe reveals itself. Easter Island, surrounded by thousands of miles of empty ocean, offers darkness profound enough to see not just stars, but the architecture of the galaxy, the Milky Way stretching horizon to horizon, a river of light composed of billions of suns. The Southern Cross hangs low and steady. Jupiter traces its slow arc. Satellites draw lines across the constellations like memories of a technological age. The Rapa Nui people, like all Polynesians, were celestial navigators. They read the sky with precision that rivals modern instruments. Star paths guided their ancestors across the Pacific. Lunar cycles governed planting and fishing. The rising and setting of specific constellations marked seasonal transitions, festival times, periods favorable for ocean voyaging. Some researchers have noted alignments between Moai and astronomical events. Certain Ahu platforms orient toward solstice sunrise or equinox sunset points. Statues seen positioned mark sightlines toward significant stars or planetary positions. The evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive, less precise than Stonehenge or the Maya pyramids, but present nonetheless. Could the Moai have served as an astronomical observatory in stone? Markers for tracking celestial cycles over generations? The idea has merit. Creating permanent monuments as calendar systems appears in cultures worldwide. Megalithic structures often encode astronomical knowledge in their orientations and geometries. At night, standing among the Moai beneath the infinite sky, the connection feels palpable. The statues become intermediaries between Earth and cosmos, their upward gaze directed not at the villages they once protected, but at the stars that govern time itself. The ancestors, in this reading, are not just historical figures, but cosmic ones, participants in cycles larger than human lifetimes, as eternal as the wheeling constellations. There is poetry in this interpretation, but there is also pragmatism. A society dependent on seasonal patterns for survival would naturally encode that knowledge in its most permanent structures. The Moai, standing for centuries, would outlast any oral tradition, any individual memory. They would be books written in stone and shadow, readable by those who knew what to look for. Modern astronomers visit Easter Island for its dark skies. The stars here shine with clarity impossible in most inhabited places. And when they set up telescopes near the Ahu platforms, something curious happens. The Moai, illuminated by starlight, seem to participate in the observation, not as inert objects, but as fellow watchers, ancient and patient, gazing at the same celestial patterns they've tracked since the day they were raised. Science and speculation blur in such moments. Data collection and wonder merge. The boundary between observation and interpretation dissolves, and one simply stands beneath infinity, small and temporary, while the stone giants keep their vigil, as they have for centuries, as they might for centuries more, reading the sky in languages we're only beginning to remember. In 1972, during the particularly stormy season that follows the Southern Hemisphere summer, a Moai at Ahu Tahai was struck by lightning. The bolt traveled through the porous tuff, superheating moisture within the stone. The statue exploded from internal pressure, scattering fragments across the Ahu platform. No one witnessed the strike itself. It occurred during a night of torrential rain and gale-force winds, but the next morning, islanders found the shattered remains. What had stood intact for centuries had been obliterated in a microsecond of atmospheric discharge. The response was immediate and complex. For some Rapa Nui people, especially older generations who maintained traditional spiritual practices despite decades of Christian missionary influence, the strike was clearly an omen. Moai were repositories of ancestral mana. For one to be destroyed by lightning, the most powerful force in nature, suggested profound displeasure from the spiritual realm, or perhaps a warning about disruptions to the balance between the living and the dead. For others, particularly younger islanders educated in Western frameworks, the event was simply bad luck, a statistical inevitability given enough time, and enough statues standing in an environment prone to electrical storms. Volcanic stone, after all, often contains minerals that attract lightning. The Moai's height made it a natural conductor. Physics, not prophecy. Both interpretations coexisted. The statue was eventually reconstructed. Modern archaeological practice favors restoration when possible, but it never quite looked the same. The seams between fragments remained visible, hairline cracks mapping the violence of its destruction and rebirth. At night, this particular Moai carries a different weight than its neighbors. Its surface, slightly more weathered from the blast and subsequent erosion, catches light differently. There's a sense of fragility, of narrowly avoided oblivion. Other statues seem eternal. This one is marked by time, by the randomness of natural forces, by the thin margin between survival and annihilation. The incident raises questions beyond the specific statue. How many other Moai across the centuries have been similarly destroyed by lightning, earthquake, tsunami, landslide? The ones we see are survivors, self-selected for favorable positioning and structural integrity. But archaeology, by definition, deals with remnants, not totalities. For every object preserved, countless others are lost. And there is something deeply human in the dual interpretation science and symbolism existing simultaneously, neither canceling the other. Perhaps this is Easter Island's deepest lesson, that explanations can coexist, that mystery and knowledge are not opposites, but partners in the endless human effort to understand the world and our place within it. The reconstructed Moai stands beneath the stars, its stone body bearing witness to both the laws of physics and the weight of meaning. And on stormy nights, when lightning splits the sky above the Pacific, one can't help but wonder if the ancient ancestors stir, speaking in thunder, reminding us that some forces remain forever beyond human control. Stone is not inert. It holds history at molecular depths, geologic time compressed into mineral matrices, crystalline structures recording conditions of formation, stress fractures mapping centuries of seismic activity. The tuff from which the Moai were carved is volcanic ash, compressed over millennia into workable rock. It formed during eruptions that shook the island when no humans yet walked its shores. In this sense, the statues are older than the culture that shaped them, ancient matter given new form by relatively recent hands. But stone holds more than geological memory. It absorbs the sun's heat during the day and releases it slowly through the night. Stand close to a Moai after dark, and you can feel the warmth radiating from its surface, a faint heat signature, like the ghost of daylight. This thermal property gives the statues a peculiar quality. They're warmer than the surrounding air, almost body temperature. The effect is subtle but unmistakable. Stone that feels alive. This is not supernatural. It's thermodynamics. Dark-colored porous rock has high thermal mass, absorbing and retaining heat. The phenomenon occurs with any similar stone structure: castle walls, cliff faces, desert boulders. But on Easter Island, with the Moai, the effect combines with psychology to create something more than physics. Human brains are wired to detect life. We evolved in environments where distinguishing animate from inanimate was survival critical. Warm things are typically alive. Things with faces are typically conscious. Our perceptual systems, operating below conscious awareness, make these judgments in milliseconds. And when presented with a 15-ton stone face, radiating body heat in the darkness, those ancient circuits activate. Presence is sensed, even if reason knows better. This neurological reality helps explain the universal report from nighttime visitors. The statues feel different after dark. Not metaphorically different, experientially different. The warmth they emit, the way shadows pool in their eye sockets, the slight variations in their expressions as moonlight shifts. All these factors trigger deep brain responses that evolved to detect and respond to living agents. The Rapa Nui people, living intimately with the Moai for centuries, would have known this effect thoroughly. They would have understood that statues were most present at night, when warmth made them touchable analogs of living flesh. This experiential reality likely reinforced spiritual beliefs about mana and ancestral presence. The stones felt alive because, in a meaningful sense, they acted as if a live worm, emanating, occupying space with weight and persistence. Modern neuroscience and ancient spirituality converge in the darkness. The Moai activate perceptual systems designed to detect consciousness. They meet neural criteria for presence, even while failing empirical tests for life. They exist in a liminal category, neither fully alive nor entirely dead, and this ambiguity makes them perfect vessels for projection, memory, meaning. Stand among them at midnight. Feel the warmth of stone against your palm. Notice the tricks of shadow and starlight that make the faces seem to turn, to breathe, to watch. And recognize that the mystery is not less real for being partly explained. The Moai work on levels deeper than culture or belief. They work on the level of perception itself, ancient stone, whispering to ancient brains, creating presence through physics and psychology intertwined. The rocks remember, not through consciousness, but through properties built into their very substance heat capacity, reflective indices, structural integrity that has survived centuries. And we remember through them, projecting backward into stone the faces and forms of those who came before, making monuments into ancestors, turning geology into history, transforming matter into memory. Every culture that encounters megalithic structures asks the same question: who built this? And when historical records are absent or fragmentary, the answer tends toward the mythological. Easter Island is no exception. The Rapa Nui oral traditions speak of two populations: the Hanau-Ip, the long ears, who arrived first and built the Moai, and the Hanau-Mamoko, the short ears, who came later and eventually overthrew their masters. The names refer to the practice of elongating earlobes with heavy ornaments, a fashion that created visible class distinction. According to legend, conflict eventually erupted. The short ears dug a defensive ditch, filled it with brush, and lured the long ears into an ambush, setting the trap ablaze. Only one long ear survived, and with his death, the knowledge of Moai construction supposedly died as well. Mainstream archaeologists view this story as metaphorical history, a culturally encoded memory of class conflict, possibly between early and late settlers, or between chiefly elites and commoner laborers. The long ears might represent the aristocratic class who directed statue construction, while the short ears were the workers who eventually rebelled against unsustainable resource demands. The ditch, called Point Ditch, actually exists and shows evidence of fire, so the legend contains historical core. But alternative theorists read the myth differently. To them, the long ears represent a technologically advanced population, perhaps survivors of a lost Pacific civilization who possess knowledge far exceeding that of later arrivals. The Moai, in this interpretation, are remnants of this earlier culture, their construction techniques lost when the builders were exterminated. This reading requires believing in pre-Polynesian settlement of Easter Island, for which no solid archaeological evidence exists. Carbon dating consistently places human arrival around 1200 CE. No artifacts, no skeletal remains, no genetic markers point to earlier habitation. The alternative theory survives on absence and anomaly. Absence of clear evidence for how all the engineering was accomplished, anomaly in the scale and ambition of the Moai project. At night, when moonlight illuminates the statues, both interpretations feel plausible. The Moai could be products of a known culture working within established capabilities, or they could be echoes of something older, something lost, preserved only in stone and fragmentary legend. The darkness doesn't resolve the question. It amplifies the ambiguity. There's a psychological comfort in lost civilization theories. They externalize the mystery, placing it safely in an unrecoverable past. They avoid confronting the unsettling reality that ordinary humans, people not unlike ourselves, achieved extraordinary things through patience, coordination, and belief systems we struggle to fully comprehend. It's easier to imagine vanished supercultures than to acknowledge that collective human will, sustained across generations, can move mountains. Yet the giants in the myths might be metaphorical in yet another way. Not lost races, but the ancestors themselves, ordinary people who, through their works, became larger than life. The Moai are giants. The people who carved them were giants in ambition and vision. And the legends that survive are human minds trying to explain, through story, the scale of what their forebears accomplished. The moon rises higher. The statues cast long shadows across the grass. And the myths whisper through the darkness stories of builders and destroyers, of knowledge gained and lost, of civilizations that reach skyward and then fall. Whether the specifics are historically accurate matters less than the human truth they contain. That we build monuments to outlast ourselves, that we encode our values in permanent form, and that we always wonder who built the wonders that came before us. Geology tells us that Easter Island is young. The volcanoes that formed it erupted only within the last million years recent by planetary standards. The island rose from the Pacific seafloor through repeated eruptions, building layer upon layer of basalt and tuff until peaks broke the surface and weathered into the subtropical landscape the Polynesians found. But the ocean is restless. Sea levels have fluctuated dramatically across deep time, dropping during ice ages when water was locked in glaciers, rising when ice melted. During the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, global sea level was roughly 400 feet lower than today. Coastlines extended far beyond their current positions. Continental shelves were dry land. Islands were larger, and archipelagos that now exist as scattered dots would have formed connected landmasses. What was Easter Island like during those low water periods? The visible island would have been larger, its coastline extending miles beyond the current cliffs. Offshore reefs that now barely breach the surface would have been hills. Underwater valleys would have been dry ravines. The total land area might have been double or triple its current size, and then the ice melted. Over millennia, the seas rose, drowning coastlines, reshaping islands, submerging entire landscapes beneath the Pacific. By the time Polynesian voyagers arrived around 1200 CE, the ocean had stabilized at roughly modern levels. But beneath the waves, older shorelines remained invisible, forgotten, accessible only to divers and sonar mapping. Could there have been earlier settlements, now underwater? The question tantalizes. If humans had reached Easter Island during the Ice Age, a massive speculative leap, given no evidence supports Pleistocene-era Pacific navigation, their settlements would lie beneath meters of ocean. Any structures, any artifacts, any evidence of habitation would be erased or entombed beneath marine sediments. Geologists and archaeologists have surveyed the waters around the island using sonar and submersibles. They found natural formations, lava flows, coral structures, underwater terraces, but no clear signs of human construction. No walls, no tools, no anomalies suggesting pre-modern habitation. The ocean has kept its secrets, if secrets exist. Yet the idea persists in certain speculative circles. Easter Island as the peak of a sunken landmass. The Moai as survivors from a drowned civilization. The amnesia of the ocean hiding truths too old for carbon dating. At night, standing on the cliffs where waves strike ancient lava, the notion feels almost credible. The ocean stretches dark and vast in every direction. What lies beneath those waves? What has been swallowed by time and tide? The archaeological method requires evidence, and absence of evidence, in this case, is most parsimoniously explained by absence of earlier habitation. But absence is hard to prove. And the ocean is very, very deep. Tsunamis have struck the island repeatedly across recorded history. The Pacific Ring of Fire generates massive earthquakes that send waves racing across the ocean basin. When they hit isolated islands, the destruction is absolute waves tens of meters high scouring everything from the coastline, dragging wreckage back into the sea. Several moai have been toppled by tsunami action, their ahu platforms damaged by water force no human conflict could match. What if earlier cultural phases, entire settlement sequences, were simply erased by cataclysmic events? Archaeology recovers what survives. But survival is not random. It's biased toward the recent, the inland, the durable. Coastal settlements are especially vulnerable. Organic materials decay, stone weathers, evidence vanishes. The moai that remain might be the third or fourth generation of monument building, preceded by earlier traditions obliterated by natural disaster and time. We see the end result of Rapa Nui cultural evolution, but the earlier chapters might be missing, not through academic oversight, but through geological violence. The night sky reflects in the ocean's surface, stars above and below, and between them, the dark water holds whatever it holds, silent, patient, revealing nothing. The geological record is clear. The seas have risen and fallen. Coastlines have drowned. islands have shrunk. Whether earlier peoples witnessed these changes, whether they built on lands now submerged, remains unknown, perhaps unknowable. But the question lingers, suspended between evidence and imagination, as the waves continue their endless assault on volcanic stones slowly, patiently, inevitably reclaiming the land for the ocean's depths. For most of modern history, the Moai stared with empty sockets. The statues had eyes. That much was clear from the carved depressions in their faces, but the eyes themselves were missing. Lost, assumed destroyed, or perhaps never installed in many cases. Then in 1978, archaeologists working at Ahu No No made a discovery. Buried in beach sand, protected from centuries of weathering and looters, they found fragments of white coral and red scoria, the missing eyes of the Moai. The design was elegant. White coral discs for the sclera, fitted with circular pupils of red scoria. When inserted into the statue's eye sockets, they created a gaze that was startling in its intensity, wide, staring, almost hypnotic. Replicas were carefully made and installed in one of the restored statues. The transformation was immediate and unsettling. The Moai went from brooding presence to active watcher. The eyes didn't just fill empty sockets, they fundamentally altered the statue's character. What had seemed contemplative became alert. What had seemed passive became engaged. At night, the effect is even more pronounced. Moonlight catches the pale coral, making the eyes gleam in the darkness. The red pupils vanish into shadow, creating the illusion of hollow sockets, but sockets that see nonetheless. The statue tracks movement, or appears to. Photographers report discomfort, an inability to shake the sensation of being watched. This raises questions about original context. If all the Moai once had eyes, and evidence suggests many did, at least during important ceremonies, their presence would have been overwhelming. Imagine walking through a village at night, dozens of massive ancestral figures staring down from their platforms, eyes glowing in torchlight. The psychological impact would be immense. These weren't just monuments, they were witnesses. The eyes might have been removable, installed only during specific rituals when the ancestors' attention was needed. Or perhaps some statues never received eyes, their unfinished state reflecting shifts in cultural practice or resource availability. The archaeological record is incomplete. We see fragments and infer totalities, knowing our inferences are provisional. But the statue with restored eyes offers a window into the past, a glimpse of how the Moai were meant to be experienced. And that experience was not one of dead stone, but of living presence. The ancestors were always watching. The statues made that watching visible, undeniable, inescapable. Modern visitors often request that photographs be taken without the eyed statue in the frame. There's something too intense about it, too confrontational. The empty sockets are comfortable, mysterious, but neutral. The eyes are accusatory, demanding, alive in ways that stone shouldn't be. At night, the statue stands in its original context: darkness, wind, the sound of ocean on stone. Its coral eyes catch starlight. And for a moment, the centuries collapse. Past and present align. And the watcher watches, as it was always meant to do, as it might do for centuries more, bearing witness to all who stand beneath its gaze. Easter Island is not solid. Beneath the grass and soil lies a labyrinth of voids, lava tubes, formed when molten rock flowed from the volcanoes. The outer layers cooling and hardening, while the inner magma continued moving, leaving hollow tunnels through the bedrock. Some are narrow crawl spaces. Others are cathedral-scale caverns where sunlight penetrates through collapsed sections, creating pools of light in subterranean darkness. The Rapa Nui people knew these caves intimately. They used them for shelter during storms, for storage of sweet potatoes in cool, dry conditions, for burial of the dead. Some caves show evidence of extensive used smoke-blackened ceilings, carved petroglyphs, modified rock formations that served as altars or markers. Others seem untouched, extending into darkness, that no light has illuminated in living memory. Speleologists have mapped portions of the island's cave systems, documenting miles of tunnels. But the mapping is incomplete. New passages are still being discovered, and there are places where locals insist caves exist, but entrances cannot be found collapsed, sealed deliberately, or hidden so well that surface topography reveals nothing. Rumors persist of deeper chambers, secret places where important artifacts were hidden during the chaos of European contact, when slavers and missionaries were destroying traditional culture. Sealed rooms containing records written in Rongorongo, the mysterious script that appeared on wooden tablets and was lost when the last literate practitioners died. Burial vaults of high chiefs, protected by curses and taboos that still discourage exploration. None of these rumors have been substantiated. Most are probably folk elaborations, the human tendency to create mystery where mundane explanation suffices. But some caves remain unexplored due to danger-unstable ceilings, poor air quality, narrow passages that risk entrapment. And in those unmapped sections, possibilities linger. At night, certain cave entrances emit cold air thermal, convection creating breeze as warm surface air sinks and cooler subterranean air rises. The locals call these breathing caves. Stand at the entrance and feel the exhalation of the earth itself, carrying scents of mineral and moisture, sounds of dripping water and settling stone. Some researchers have used ground-penetrating radar and other geophysical tools to search for anomalies beneath known archaeological sites. They've identified voids under some Ahu platforms, possible chambers, or simply natural cavities. Excavation is complex, expensive, and potentially damaging to the structures above. So the voids remain, contents unknown, speculation unchecked. What might lie beneath? At minimum, additional burial sites. Polynesian cultures often interred important individuals in secret locations to protect the remains from desecration. Beyond that, perhaps caches of tools, carved objects, materials deemed too sacred or dangerous to leave exposed. Or perhaps nothing, just empty stone, devoid of human trace. But the caves add dimension to Easter Island's mystery. The Moai draw attention upward, monumental, visible, impossible to miss. But beneath that vertical drama, horizontal labyrinths extend through darkness, holding their own histories, their own silences. The island is layered surface and subsurface, light and shadow, known and hidden. At night, when the stars illuminate the landscape and the Moai stand in their eternal vigil, the earth beneath breathes its slow exhalations. And somewhere in that darkness below, in passages carved by ancient lava and perhaps modified by ancient hands, the island keeps its deepest secrets, waiting for the questions we haven't yet learned to ask, the tools we haven't yet invented, the courage required to descend into the dark and see what the earth has hidden. This is where speculation reaches its furthest extension, where the gap between evidence and imagination becomes an abyss, where questions proliferate beyond any hope of definitive answer. The idea that Easter Island was not first settled around 1200 CE by Polynesian voyagers, but far earlier millennia, earlier by a people whose origins and fate remain lost to history. The evidence against this hypothesis is substantial. Carbon dating of archaeological sites clusters tightly around the 1200 CE arrival date. No artifacts, structures, or biological remains predate this period. Genetic studies of Rapa Nui descendants trace clear lineages to Polynesian populations, with no anomalous markers suggesting admixture with unknown groups. Linguistic analysis places Rapa Nui language firmly within the Polynesian family. The mainstream scientific consensus is overwhelming. Settlement began in the 13th century CE by skilled Polynesian navigators. Yet the question persists in certain circles. Why? Because anomaly, even in the absence of evidence, can fuel speculation. And there are anomalies, not in the data, but in the scale and ambition of what the Rapa Nui accomplished in the few centuries before European contact. 900 moai in 500 years. Massive Ahu platforms requiring engineering sophistication. A writing system that appeared suddenly and was lost just as quickly. The sheer intensity of creative and physical output seems, to some, to require deeper time or external influence. The pre-Polynesian theory takes various forms. In its most modest version, it suggests that Polynesian settlers found an island already inhabited by a small relict population, perhaps descendants of an earlier failed colonization, attempt whose knowledge accelerated moai development. More extreme versions propose Easter Island as an outpost of a lost Pacific civilization, Amu or Lemuria, whose collapse predated recorded history, but whose monuments survived. These ideas find no support in rigorous archaeology. They persist because human imagination is drawn to lost civilizations. We want to believe that beneath known history lies deeper, hidden history, that the official narrative is incomplete, that mysteries exist which mainstream science either cannot or will not acknowledge. At night, standing among the moai, the temptation toward such thinking intensifies. The statues are so ambitious, so seemingly excessive for a small island population. Their presence whispers of depths we haven't fathomed. But whispers are not data. The most probable explanation remains the simplest. The Rapa Nui people, working within Polynesian cultural frameworks and technologies, created the moai through sustained collective effort over centuries. Their achievement does not require lost civilizations or external intervention. It requires only what the archaeological record abundantly demonstrates: human creativity, social organization, and the ability to mobilize resources toward monumental goals. But probability is not certainty. An absence of evidence is not absolute proof of absence. It's remotely possible, extremely remotely, that earlier settlement occurred and left no trace that modern methods can detect. Wooden structures would decay. Organic materials would vanish. If the population was small and their material culture minimal, detection would be nearly impossible. This is the space where speculation lives, not in what is proven, but in what cannot be definitively disproven. It's an uncomfortable space for scientists, who require falsifiable hypotheses and reproducible results. But it's a comfortable space for mystery, for the sense that history might hold more than we think, that the past is not fully known, perhaps not fully knowable. The moai watch from their platforms. The stars wheel overhead, and somewhere between evidence and imagination, between the known arrival of Polynesians and the unknown millennia before, the question hangs: could there have been others? And if so, what became of them? We will likely never know. But in the darkness, surrounded by stone giants whose origins are well documented, but whose presence remains somehow inexplicable, the question feels less like academic exercise and more like primal human need. The need to believe that mysteries remain unsolved, that the world holds secrets, that the past has not yet yielded all its truths. Strip away the statues, the Ahu platforms, the archaeological debate, and Easter Island becomes a stage for a different kind of observational relationship between Earth and cosmos that has nothing to do with human culture and everything to do with the planet's position in space. The island sits at 27 degrees south latitude, roughly 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. Its isolation means minimal light pollution, even in the modern era. On moonless nights, the darkness is profound, the kind of darkness that urban dwellers never experience, where the Milky Way casts shadows and planets shine bright enough to navigate by. The atmosphere above the Pacific is exceptionally clear, scrubbed clean by thousands of miles of open ocean. Humidity is low. Seeing conditions, in astronomical terms, are superb. For anyone interested in celestial observation, Easter Island is a natural observatory, and there are hints suggestive, rather than conclusive, that the Rapa Nui people used it as such. Certain moai orientations align with astronomical events. Not all, not even most, but enough to suggest intentionality. Some Ahu platforms face points on the horizon where the sun rises at solstice. Others align with the setting position of specific bright stars, Rigel, Sirius, the Southern Cross, at times of year significant for agricultural or ritual calendars. Is this proof of astronomical function? Not quite. Any set of monuments will show some alignments simply by chance. To demonstrate intentional celestial observation requires statistical rigor, showing that alignments occur more frequently than random distribution would predict, and connecting those alignments to documented cultural practices. That work is ongoing. Some researchers argue the evidence meets threshold. Others remain skeptical, pointing out that Polynesian cultures navigated by stars at sea, but didn't generally build terrestrial observatories. The Moai, they suggest, might show incidental alignments without reflecting primary astronomical purpose. Yet at night, beneath the stars, functional ambiguity seems beside the point. Whether or not the statues were designed as celestial markers, they create a relationship between observer and cosmos. Standing among the Moai, looking up at the rotating sky, one becomes acutely aware of the planet's motion, the slow wheel of stars, the arc of the ecliptic, the rhythms that govern all life on Earth. Polynesian navigation was fundamentally astronomical. Voyagers memorized star paths, the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars across the year. They understood declination, even if they didn't use that term. They knew which stars passed directly overhead at different latitudes, using this knowledge to maintain course across thousands of miles of featureless ocean. This expertise was profound, encoding observational astronomy in practical, survival-oriented form. The Rapa Nui inherited this tradition. Their ancestors arrived by reading the stars. It would be strange if their descendants didn't maintain some astronomical practice. And if they did, the Moai permanent, aligned, precisely positioned, would be logical markers. Not telescopes or astrolabes, but something simpler and perhaps more durable. Stone calendars, horizon indicators, monuments that simultaneously honored ancestors and tracked the heavens those ancestors navigated by. Recent research using computer models to reconstruct past sky positions has identified interesting patterns. During certain historical periods, specific Moai aligned with heliacal risings, the first annual appearance of stars just before dawn. These events were important markers in many ancient cultures, signaling seasonal transitions. If the Rapa Nui used such alignments, the Moai become multivalent: ancestor memorials, engineering achievements, and astronomical tools simultaneously. At night, when modern astronomers set up equipment on the island, they sometimes position themselves near Ahu platforms. The Moai, backlit by starlight, frame the view. And in those moments, ancient and modern observation converge. The human impulse to watch the sky, to track patterns, to find meaning in celestial motion, connects across centuries. The tools differ: stone versus glass, alignment versus spectrography, but the underlying drive is identical. The stars turn, the Moai endure. And Easter Island, this lonely speck of volcanic rock in the world's largest ocean, becomes a meeting point between Earth and infinity, a place where human ambition reaches upward, building monuments that double as cosmic markers, creating culture that encodes astronomical knowledge in permanent form. Whether the primary function was spiritual, practical, or both doesn't diminish the achievement. The Rapa Nui people created something that lasts, something that speaks across time, something that turns human observers, ancient and modern alike, toward the universe beyond our tiny world. In that turning, in that moment of looking up from stone to star, the full scope of the mystery reveals itself. Not just how the statues were built, but why. Not just what they mean, but what they point toward. Not just the past they record, but the infinite present they help us observe. There are moments on Easter Island when all the theories, all the speculation, All the archaeological frameworks fall away, and you're left with pure presence. No explanations. No narratives. Just you, the night, and the statues. This is one of those moments. Midnight. No moon. The Milky Way stretches overhead like luminous fog. The only sounds are wind through grass and the distant percussion of waves on stone. The temperature has dropped subtropical daytime warmth, replaced by a chill that cuts through clothing, makes breath visible. The Moai are darker shapes against dark sky, barely distinguishable from the landscape, yet undeniably there. Mass and weight, and the subtle warmth radiating from stone that absorbed sunlight hours ago. You stand among them, insignificant against their scale, temporary against their permanence. And in the silence, something happens, not supernatural, not mystical, but profound nonetheless. The human sense of time shifts, centuries compress. The distance between now and the moment these statues were raised, between the hands that carved them and the hands that touch them now, collapses. Past and present blur. The dead and the living occupy the same space. This is what the Moai do. This is their function, perhaps more fundamental than any specific astronomical or ritual purpose. They create presence. They make the past tangible. They turn abstract history into immediate experience. Standing before them, you don't just know intellectually that people lived here centuries ago. You feel it. You sense the weight of their labor, the intensity of their belief, the sheer sustained effort required to transform stone into monuments. And you recognize something uncomfortable, that the people who built these statues were not like you. Not in belief system, not in worldview, not in fundamental assumptions about reality. They inhabited a cosmos where ancestors walked, where stone could hold spiritual power, where the boundary between matter and spirit was permeable rather than absolute. To truly understand the Moai requires not just archaeological knowledge, but imaginative leap, the willingness to temporarily set aside modern rationalism and enter a different mode of being. Most visitors cannot make that leap, cannot or will not. We remain anchored in our own time, viewing the statues through lenses of tourism, history, science. These lenses are useful. They provide context and understanding, but they also create distance, separating observer from observed, keeping the mystery safely at arm's length. At midnight, in the profound darkness, that distance erodes. The Moai cease to be objects of study and become simply themselves stone shapes with faces, watching nothing, watching everything, indifferent to your presence, yet somehow acknowledging it through sheer mass and permanence. They were here before you arrived. They will be here after you leave. Your entire lifespan, all your concerns, achievements, failures, is less than a breath to these stones. This is existentially uncomfortable. Humans prefer to feel significant, to believe our individual lives matter. Confronting true deep time geological, archaeological, cosmic undermines that belief. We are brief. Our species is brief. Even our monuments, impressive as they seem, will eventually erode, crumble, vanish. The Moai are already weathering, already surrendering to entropy. In 10,000 years, they might be unrecognizable mounds. In 1,000,000, they'll be dust. Yet in the moment, they endure. And that endurance, that stubborn resistance to time, is what moves us. The Moai represent the human refusal to accept transience. We know we're temporary. We build anyway. We know our works will fade. We carve them anyway. The statues are defiance rendered in stone, a declaration that we were here, we mattered, we left marks that outlast our making. The wind picks up. The stars wheel imperceptibly overhead, and you stand in the dark, small and cold and alive, surrounded by the silent giants. No answers come, no revelations. Just the stark fact of present stone and human, sharing space across centuries, connected by the simple act of being here, now together in the immense darkness. This is what Easter Island offers, finally. Not solutions, but solidarity. The knowledge that humans before you stood here, felt what you feel, looked up at these same stars, touched these same stones. And humans after you will do the same. The chain of witness extends backward and forward, and you are one link in that chain, temporary but necessary, brief but real. The midnight silence holds this truth, and the Moai, unchanged and unchanging, bear witness as they have always done, as they will continue to do, long after the questions are forgotten and only the stones remain. But the story does not end with stone. The Moai are monuments, but the living culture persists. The Rapa Nui people, descendants of the original Polynesian settlers, still inhabit the island, carrying forward traditions that survived colonization, epidemic, cultural suppression, and the near extinction of their population in the 19th century. This continuity is remarkable. By the 1870s, the Rapa Nui population had crashed to barely 100 individuals. Smallpox, tuberculosis, and Peruvian slave raids had devastated the community. Most of the elders, the keepers of oral traditions, the last speakers of the full language, the practitioners of ancient rituals had died. The culture teetered on the edge of complete loss. But it didn't fall. Through intermarriage with Chilean settlers, through stubborn preservation of key practices, through the eventual return of autonomy and cultural pride in the late 20th century, the Rapa Nui people recovered. Today, several thousand individuals identify as Rapa Nui. The language is being revitalized, taught in schools, spoken in homes. Traditional arts, carving, dance, navigation are practiced and passed down. The culture is alive, not as museum piece, but as living tradition. And at the center of this tradition are the Moai, not as relics from a dead past, but as ancestral presence that continues to matter. Modern Rapa Nui people maintain complex relationships with the statues. Some are deeply spiritual, viewing the Moai as literal embodiments of ancestors who still watch over the island. Others take a more symbolic view, seeing the statues as cultural heritage deserving respect and protection. But all recognize the Moai as central to Rapa Nui identity. At night, during certain festivals and ceremonies, fires are lit near the Ahu platforms. The old songs are soon not reconstructions, but actual transmitted traditions, melodies that have been passed down through generations. The dancers move in patterns that echo ancient performances, their bodies telling stories that words alone cannot capture. Watching these ceremonies, especially in firelight with the Moai looming behind, one understands that the statues were never meant to be viewed in isolation. They were components of living culture, backdrops for ritual, focal points for community gathering, markers of identity and belonging. Removed from that context, displayed in museums or photographed by tourists, they become artifacts. But in their original setting, animated by human presence and cultural meaning, they become what they always were, participants in ongoing story. The elders speak carefully about the Moai. Much of what they know is considered sacred, not for public discussion. There are protocols around approaching certain statues, around photographing specific sites, around conduct in sacred spaces. These protocols are sometimes dismissed by outsiders as invented tradition, recent constructions designed to control tourism. But the elders maintain they are genuine transmissions, practices preserved through the dark centuries and now being reasserted as the culture regains strength. Whether strictly continuous with the pre-contact culture or reinvented based on fragmentary memory, these practices serve a crucial function. They make the Moai relevant to living people. They prevent the statues from becoming purely archaeological objects, frozen in the past, disconnected from present concerns. Instead, the Moai remain active agents in cultural life, sources of pride, markers of identity, bridges between past and present. At night, when the tourists have returned to their hotels and the island grows quiet, it's the Rapa Nui people who remain with the statues, who walk the familiar paths, who know which Moai belonged to which ancestral clan, who carry the stories that no guidebook records. They are the last keepers of memory, not just intellectual knowledge, but embodied cultural knowledge that lives in practice and relationship rather than text. This is crucial to understanding Easter Island's mystery. The past is not dead. It's not even past, to borrow Faulkner's phrase. It's present, active, shaping contemporary life in ways visible and invisible. The Moai are not just historical curiosities. They are family, legacy, identity, responsibility. And the people who live with them daily carry knowledge that academic archaeology can approach but never fully possess. Knowledge of belonging to place, of being connected across generations, of inheriting both the achievements and the burdens of ancestors. The fires burn low, the songs end, the dancers rest. And the Moai stand watch, as they have for centuries, as they will for centuries more, witnessed by the descendants of those who carved them, kept alive not just by stone as durability, but by human memory, as stubborn insistence that the past remains present, that ancestors are not gone. That stone can hold meaning if we choose to give it and guard it and pass it on. Every monument is a kind of grief, a recognition that the present will become past, that what matters now will fade, that memory is fragile and time is relentless. We build against oblivion. We carve permanence from stone because flesh cannot last, because names are forgotten, because even the mightiest civilizations crumble into dust and ruin. The Moai embody this universal human condition. They are products of a culture that knew intimately, existentially, how precarious life could be. Easter Island was never paradise. It was a small island in an immense ocean, subject to drought and storms, limited in resources, vulnerable to ecological collapse. The people who settled it were brave, but they were also isolated. If something went wrong, no rescue would come. They were alone, and so they built, not practical structures, not fortifications or granaries. They built monuments to transcendence, physical manifestations of the belief that human spirit could outlast human flesh. The Moai were insurance against oblivion, proof that this culture existed, that these people lived, that their achievements deserved remembrance. In this, the Rapa Nui story becomes universal. Every human culture faces the same dilemma. We are conscious of our mortality, aware that we will die, that our communities will transform beyond recognition, that time erases everything. And yet, we refuse to accept erasure. We paint caves, build temples, carve statues, write books. We create culture as a bulwark against the dark. Easter Island's isolation makes this dynamic especially stark. On a continent, cultures can blend and evolve, their legacies absorbed into larger continuums. But on a tiny island in the Pacific, there is no larger continuum. A culture stands alone. Its monuments speak only for itself. And when that culture nearly went extinct in the 19th century, the Moai became almost unbearably poignant statues, still standing while the world they represented had collapsed. Yet they did stand, and the culture did survive. And this fact offers a different lesson. Not inevitability of collapse, but possibility of resilience. The Rapa Nui people endured catastrophes that should have erased them. They lost population, language, political autonomy, land. But they held on to enough memory, enough identity, enough stubborn refusal to vanish, that regeneration became possible. The Moai participated in this survival. They couldn't be destroyed without enormous effort. They stood as reminders, even during the worst periods, that Rapa Nui culture had achieved greatness. That the people who came before were mighty builders, artists, engineers. That the present might be reduced, but the past was glorious. And perhaps the future could reclaim some of that glory. This is what monuments do at their best. They aren't just backward-looking. They're forward-looking too. They tell descendants, you come from people who built this. You have that legacy. You can draw strength from it. At night, when darkness erases the modern intrusions, the paved roads, the tourist facilities, the infrastructure of contemporary life, the island returns to something closer to its original state. The Moai dominate the landscape again. The stars shine as they did before electricity. And for a moment, one can imagine the world as it was. Smaller, harder, more precarious, but also more immediate, more connected to place, more aware of the thin margin between thriving and surviving. This vanished world is not recoverable, nor should it be romanticized. Life was difficult. Infant mortality was high. Violence was common. The environmental crisis, whether overstated or not, was real enough that statue construction eventually ceased. But that world also produced the Moai. It generated artistic vision and collective will sufficient to transform an entire landscape into a monumental statement. Modern civilization has comforts and capacities the Rapa Nui people couldn't imagine. But it's worth asking, could we do what they did? Could we coordinate hundreds of people across generations to achieve a goal with no immediate practical benefit? Could we invest that much faith in symbols, in ancestors, in the idea that permanence matters even when survival is uncertain? Maybe we could. Maybe we do, in different forms. Our monuments are skyscrapers, space stations, internet archives. Our legacy building takes different shapes. But the impulse is identical. The human need to say, we were here, to leave marks that outlast making, to build against the inevitable night. The stars turn overhead. The Moai watch the darkness. And somewhere between the vanished world of their creation and the uncertain world of their preservation, we stand temporary observers of permanent stones, brief lives measuring themselves against monuments, finding in that comparison both humility and inspiration. The world that made the Moai is gone, but the Moai remain. And in their remaining, they offer the possibility that what we build with care, what we invest with meaning, what we commit to memory and stone, might also survive us, carrying forward some essential truth about who we were and what we valued. Speaking to descendants we'll never meet, bridging the vast darkness between then and now, between now and whatever comes next. And then there are the others, the theories that operate outside academic consensus, the explanations that reach beyond archaeology into speculation, beyond evidence into imagination, beyond the probable into the fantastical. They persist in books, documentaries, internet forums, and late-night conversations, ideas too compelling to die, too unsupported to live in scholarly discourse. The alien hypothesis is the most famous. The notion that the Moai were built with extraterrestrial assistance, or by extraterrestrials themselves, leaving monuments on Earth as markers or messages. This idea gained prominence in the 1970s with Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, which presented Easter Island as evidence of ancient astronauts visiting primitive Earth. The reasoning goes, the statues are too ambitious for a Stone Age culture. The precision of carving, the scale of transport, the sheer number of Moai, surely this requires advanced technology. Since mainstream archaeology offers only rope and manpower as explanations, and since, to the hypothesis proponents, those methods seem insufficient, external intervention must be invoked. Aliens with anti-gravity devices, ancient astronauts sharing knowledge, star-faring civilizations leaving calling cards. The academic response is straightforward. The Moai are entirely explicable through known Polynesian capabilities. Experimental archaeology has successfully replicated the carving and transport methods. No technological anachronisms exist. No materials or techniques beyond the demonstrated capacity of human cultures appear in the archaeological record. The alien hypothesis solves a problem that doesn't exist while ignoring the robust solutions that do. Yet the hypothesis persists. Why? Partly because it's appealing. Aliens are exciting. They make history more dramatic, existence less lonely, the universe more populated. And there is something psychologically satisfying about explaining human achievement through external agency. It reduces the discomfort of confronting how much our ancestors accomplished with tools and methods we now consider primitive. But there's also a darker undertone. The alien hypothesis often contains implicit assumptions about which cultures could and couldn't achieve monumental architecture. It appears more often in discussions of non-European civilizations, Easter Island, Egypt, Central America, than European ones. This pattern reveals biases about technological sophistication and cultural capacity that deserve examination. Beyond aliens, other fringe theories circulate. The energy reactor hypothesis, that Moai were designed to collect or transmit electromagnetic energy, functioning as components in an island-wide power grid or communication array. The antediluvian civilization theory, that Easter Island is a remnant of Mu or Lemuria, lost Pacific continents that sank beneath the waves, leaving only the highest peaks visible. The magnetic levitation theory, that ancient priests possessed knowledge of magnetic fields and sound frequencies, allowing them to neutralize stone weight and move statues effortlessly. None of these ideas have evidentiary support. All require technologies or physical principles that leave no trace and find no parallel in documented history. They exist in the realm of speculation, sometimes creative speculation, sometimes cynical exploitation of mystery for commercial purposes. At night, surrounded by Moai under infinite stars, one can understand the psychological appeal of these theories. As statues do seem impossible, their presence does feel anomalous. And human minds, confronted with anomaly, generate explanations, sometimes rigorous, sometimes wild, but always attempting to close the gap between experience and understanding. The problem with fringe theories isn't that they ask questions. Questions are valuable. The problem is that they reject answers. When mainstream archaeology provides comprehensive explanations supported by excavation, experimentation, and cross-cultural comparison, and those explanations are dismissed without cause, inquiry stops. Mystery becomes identity. Not knowing becomes preferable to knowing. And the actual human achievement, the genuine, documented brilliance of Polynesian engineering and social organization is diminished in favor of fantasies that strip credit from the people who actually did the work. The Moai were built by humans. This is certain. They were built with stone tools, rope, wood, and collective effort. This is demonstrated. They represent a remarkable but entirely explicable achievement within human cultural and technological capacity. This is the scientific consensus, and it deserves respect. But consensus doesn't kill wonder. Understanding how the Moai were built doesn't erase the emotional impact of standing among them. Knowledge and mystery can coexist. We can comprehend the engineering while still feeling the presence. We can accept the archaeological narrative while still experiencing the statues as more than inert stone. The theories that refuse to die do so because they offer a shortcut to wonder away to feel the mystery without doing the work of learning the facts. But the real wonder is deeper. It's in the human capacity to build beyond need, to create meaning from matter, to coordinate across generations toward goals that transcend individual lifetimes. That's the miracle. Not aliens or lost super civilizations, but ordinary humans doing extraordinary things through patience, skill, and vision. The stars shine on the Moai. The statues stand, indifferent to the theories spun around them. They know nothing of aliens or energy fields. They are stone, carved by human hands, moved by human strength, meaning what humans decide they mean. And in that simple reality lies all the mystery anyone should need, the mystery of consciousness, creativity, culture, and the stubborn human refusal to accept that stone is only stone. There is a final way to understand the Moai, beyond archaeology or speculation, beyond mainstream or fringe. It requires stepping back from questions of construction and purpose, From debates about dates and methods, from all the frameworks we use to contain mystery, it requires seeing the statues as what they are, right now, in this moment, survivors. 900 years, give or take. 900 years of wind and rain, volcanic soil and salt spray, earthquakes and tsunamis, human conflict and natural disaster. And the Moai still stand. Not all many were toppled in the statue-toppling wars. Others fell to earthquakes. Some simply eroded until they collapsed. But enough remain upright. Enough have been restored. That the essential phenomenon persists. Stone faces watching the horizon, backs to the ocean, gaze inland toward the island they were meant to protect. They are sentinels. This role supersedes all others. Whether intended as ancestor memorials, astronomical markers, status symbols, or spiritual vessels, their actual function, the thing they actually do, is watch. They occupy high points and coastal platforms. They face outward and inward. They define the boundary between land and sea, culture and nature, human and non-human. In this sense, the Moai are liminal figures. They stand at thresholds, neither fully of the world nor fully transcendent from it. They are carved from the earth, literally, pieces of the island itself transformed into art, yet they represent beings beyond earth, ancestors who have passed into the spiritual realm. They are cultural products made by humans for human purposes, yet their scale and permanence give them quasi-natural status, like mountains or cliffs features of the landscape that existed before us and will remain after. This liminality makes them powerful symbols, not just for Rapa Nui culture, but universally. Every culture has threshold figures, guardians, gatekeepers, beings that mediate between realms. The Moai serve this function with particular intensity because of their physicality. They are not abstract concepts or mythological entities. They are tons of stone, occupying specific coordinates, measurable and mappable. They are real in the most literal sense, yet they signify something beyond themselves. At night, this symbolic function becomes experiential. The Moai cease to be objects of analysis and become presences in the landscape. They mark space, creating orientation. You navigate relative to them. They become fixed points in a dark world, stable references when everything else sky, sea, grass seems fluid and uncertain. And they wait. This is perhaps their most essential quality. The Moai wait. They have waited for centuries. They will wait for centuries more, barring catastrophe. They embody patience at a scale humans struggle to comprehend. Our lives are measured in decades. The Moai measure in centuries. Our concerns are immediate food, shelter, relationship, meaning. The Moai have no concerns. They simply persist, indifferent to the passage of seasons, the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycling of days into nights. This waiting is not passive. It's active, alert. The statues watch. Their eyes, whether actual coral and scoria or empty sockets, are open. They see or appear to see or create the experience of seeing in those who stand before them. And in that seeing, they fulfill their purpose: to witness, to remember, to guard. Against what? The ocean. Threats from the sea storms, tsunamis, invading fleets. Or perhaps just entropy, the slow dissolution of order that afflicts all complex systems. The Moai stand as bulwarks, physical manifestations of the human will to resist change, to maintain identity, to preserve culture against forces natural and historical that constantly threaten to erase it. They cannot actually protect. Stone cannot turn aside waves or disease, but they can represent protection, and representation matters. The Moai give tangible form to intangible hopes, that the ancestors watch over the living, that the past informs the present, that efforts toward permanence are not futile, even though everything eventually fades. The Pacific stretches dark and vast beyond the cliffs. Waves that began their journey thousands of miles away strike the volcanic coast. Wind carries salt and sound. And the moai stand massive and patient, carved long ago by people who knew they would not live to see their work's full impact, built in faith that future generations would understand and maintain and honor what they had created. Some of that faith was rewarded. The statues survived. The culture, against all odds, survived. Meaning was preserved and is being reclaimed. The moai still guard, still watch, still stand sentinel over an island that has endured more than most colonization, near extinction, environmental crisis, and emerged not unscathed, but present, continuing, determined to carry forward the legacy embodied in stone, standing watch over the Pacific. Not just a description, a vocation, a role the moai have filled since their raising and will continue to fill as long as stone endures. They are patient guardians of memory, witnesses to history, markers of place and identity. They do not speak. They do not move. But they remain. And in remaining, they say everything that needs saying about human defiance of time, about the power of collective vision, about the stubborn insistence that what we build, and who we are, deserves to outlast our brief existence beneath these ancient stars. The camera drifts. Moonlight has returned, crescent and silver, casting shadows that stretch and soften the landscape. The wind has gentled. The ocean's voice drops to a whisper. And the moai stand as they have throughout this journey, exactly as they will tomorrow night and the night after, unchanging, unyielding, eternal, in the only way matter can be eternal, by refusing for a while longer to surrender to time. We began with mystery. Why do these statues feel different at night? And we have walked through history and speculation, archaeology and mythology, science and wonder. We have heard the mainstream narrative's settlement by Polynesian voyagers, ingenious engineering with rope and stone, cultural evolution and ecological adaptation. We have entertained the alternative's lost knowledge, earlier civilizations, acoustic mysteries, astronomical alignments. We have felt the weight of stone, the presence of ancestors, the gulf between then and now. And yet, standing here at the end, what have we truly learned? Perhaps this, that the moai resist singular explanation. They are too complex, too layered, too rich in meaning to be captured by any one framework. They are archaeological artifacts, yes. They are cultural symbols. They are engineering marvels. They are spiritual vessels. They are tourist attractions and sources of pride. They are questions without final answers, and answers that generate new questions. This multiplicity is not failure of understanding. It's the nature of what the moai are. Like all great art, they exceed their contexts. They mean more than their makers intended, persist beyond their original purposes, accumulate significance across centuries as each generation encounters them anew. The night leaves unsaid what cannot be said. It leaves space for interpretation, for personal response, for the individual experience that comes from standing in darkness before monuments that defy easy categorization. What you feel here is yours. What you take away is unique. The moai offer themselves to each observer differently, reflecting back something of the observer while revealing something of themselves. We will never fully know the minds of the people who carved these giants. We will never experience the worldview that made statue building seem necessary and natural. Too much time has passed. Too many links in the chain of transmission have broken. The culture that created the moai has transformed into something new, related but distinct, continuous yet changed. But we have the stones, and the stones, for all their silence, speak. They speak of effort and vision, of coordination and craft, of belief systems that valued permanence and honored ancestors, of aesthetic sensibilities that found beauty in monumental scale, of engineering pragmatism that solved seemingly impossible problems, of societies that, for all their struggles, achieved something remarkable, something that draws us here, centuries later, still asking questions, still seeking understanding. The mystery of Easter Island is not that the Moai exist. Explain their construction, however you prefer walking statues, lost knowledge, alien intervention. The fact remains that they stand, and standing, they testify to human capacity. The mystery is what that capacity means. Why we build beyond necessity. Why we create beauty. Why we invest stone with meaning. Why we need monuments at all. These are questions without technical answers. They're philosophical, existential, spiritual. They touch the core of what makes us human. Our awareness of time, our consciousness of mortality, our desperate need to matter, to leave marks, to be remembered. The Moai embody these needs in their purest form, stone carved into faces, earth shaped into immortality, matter transformed into meaning. And at night, when the rational frameworks fall away, when the scientific explanations fade into darkness, we're left with direct encounter, stone and human, present and past, the living and the ancestral. No mediation, no interpretation, just presence, weight, the cold of stone, and the warmth it radiates, the sensation of being small before something vast and old and patient. What the night leaves unsaid is the space for wonder. Not wonder born of ignorance. We know much about the Moai, and that knowledge is valuable. But wonder born of recognition that knowledge is not the end of inquiry. That understanding mechanisms doesn't exhaust meaning. That even fully explained, the world remains mysterious in the deeper sense, full of mystery, pregnant with possibility, open to interpretation, resistant to final closure. The Moai will stand here long after this night ends, long after we've left, returned to our daily lives, resumed the routines that fill our brief existences. They stood before we arrived. They'll stand after we've gone. And perhaps that's the final lesson, the humbling recognition of scale, of our proper proportion in the sweep of time. We are temporary. They are closer to permanent. We seek understanding. They simply are. We ask questions. They wait, patient beyond measure, for questions we haven't yet formulated, for visitors not yet born, for futures they will witness with the same stone indifference they've shown to every past. The stars wheel overhead. The camera pulls back, rising, the Moai shrinking but never disappearing, their forms etched against the landscape even as distance grows. The island becomes small, a dot in the immense Pacific, and still the statues stand, still they watch, invisible now but present, keeping their vigil over an island, over an ocean, over histories, recorded and unrecorded, over mysteries solved and unsolved, standing watch through the deep of night, through the turn of centuries, through the endless patient waiting that is their nature and their gift and their burden. What the night leaves unsaid is everything that matters most. And the Moai, carved long ago by hands turned to dust, erected by a culture transformed beyond recognition, standing now beneath stars that burn unchanged, hold that silence close. They guard it, they embody it. They remind us that not everything needs to be spoken, that some truths live better in stone than words. That mystery is not absence, but presence, the presence of something too large for explanation, too old for complete recovery, too meaningful to be reduced to facts alone. This is Easter Island. These are the Moai. And this is the question they ask each person who stands before them. What will you build that lasts? What meaning will you carve from matter? What marks will outlive your making? What ancestors will watch, centuries hence, over the world you leave behind?